No duo may have defined a decade in film quite like the two Coreys. But what happens when the decade nears an end? Would their final film foray of the 80s leave fans wanting more? Or would it make viewers wish they could wake up from a horrible dream? Find out as we set out to prove to you that 1989's Dream a Little Dream is not that bad. Welcome to this edition of It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies, or as this one might be known as, the big whopping 0%er. We are talking Dream a Little Dream, and joining us on our cavalcade of finding good things to talk about is Erin Marlow from the It's a Fandom Thing podcast. Erin, welcome to the show for the first time. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to defend this movie that I know a lot of people hate, so I'm excited to talk about this one.
This movie had to basically be one of those things where it's like, think about it, the 80s, the Coreys were the biggest thing. So I have to ask, before getting into this, were you a Coreys fan, and was there one Corey over the other that you favored?
Okay, here's the weird thing. I love this movie, but I was not a Corey fan. I was not a big Corey fan. I wasn't one of those girls. But as far as favoring one, I actually did favor Corey Haim over Corey Feldman for sure. Like 100,000%. But I actually was not a big Corey person, which is kind of odd that I love this movie so much. But yeah.
Because it does feel very much like a Corey's vehicle. But before we get into the breakdown of this film, it is time to take Dream a Little Dream and trailerize it. What if all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream? Deep, thoughtful words not to be found anywhere in Dream a Little Dream. The two Coreys together again, but seemingly only one matters at all, as Corey Feldman carries the weight of not only the movie, but Jason Robards' conscience in this not-so-Freaky Friday matinee. Watch as he Michael Jacksons his way through scenes that make the audience want to moonwalk out of, in this art house-style flick that leaves fans wanting more montages. Dream a Little Dream, rated PG-13.
That was amazing. It was so hard not to laugh, I have to say, while you were doing that. I was like, I should just mute my microphone and just laugh because that was amazing.
Okay, so we have to get into this. Let's break it down with who's actually starred in this one here. It stars, of course, as we mentioned, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, although it almost didn't star Corey Haim. He was actually cast after his girlfriend at the time, Lala, insisted that he be in it when she was cast into it. But it also starred Piper Laurie, Meredith Salinger, Harry Dean Stanton, Jason Robards, Alex Rocco, and the one that surprised me most, and I was actually like, as soon as her name popped up on the opening credits, I was like, oh, Victoria Jackson's in this. This makes me so happy now.
Yeah, I know that one is, but that one surprises me every time I rewatch it. So yeah, that one's a shocker. Yep, it's quite a cast. I mean, really.
It is when you think about 1989, and first of all, of course, Victoria Jackson being like a big Saturday Night Live alum, and of course the Coreys being the Coreys, but it almost didn't star Meredith Salinger. Up for the role of Lainey originally were Jennifer Connelly and Ione Skye. Now, of course, Ione Skye was in Say Anything in 1989. Connelly also released a film in 1989, and I just learned about this film, called Étoile when it first came out. Now it's just called Ballet. But it's basically the 1989 version of Black Swan, which I find actually really fascinating, because Black Swan, which was heralded as one of those big, like, oh, this is such an original film. Well, it kind of looks like it was done before. And the funny thing is, Jennifer Connelly was actually up for the role of Beth McIntyre in Black Swan before it went to Winona Ryder. So I'm now curious to watch Étoile.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to have to look for that one. I wonder if it's easy to find. Probably not, but...
Well, the fact that Ione Skye took Say Anything tells me that she clearly made the right choice.
Well, yeah. I mean, even though I like this movie, yes.
It was directed by Mark Rocco, who was also the producer and screenplay, and yes, adopted son of Alex Rocco. There were only 4 movies that Mark Rocco directed in his career. The last was 1995's Murder in the First. This was the second one, and I'm surprised it wasn't the last.
Yeah, well, and I don't know, you're probably going to get to this, but there's actually a sequel to this movie too. So
there is, and I have to mention it because the writer was Daniel J. Franklin. Now, if you take a look at his writing credits, there's Dream a Little Dream. Mm-hmm. He has a writer credit for Dream a Little Dream 2, which I was surprised there was actually a sequel to, and 1 episode of Knots Landing.
Oh, really?
So
wow.
Apparently Knots Landing wasn't complicated enough, so he had to make Dream a Little Dream, I'm guessing. But the fact that there's a Dream a Little Dream 2 makes me question all of cinema's choices.
Well, it's very much, I've seen it once years and years ago, and it's very much like a direct-to-video kind of thing, and it involves sunglasses, like this magical pair of sunglasses. I'm not even joking. And yeah, it doesn't even have, the only people back are the Coreys. So it's
it's the Like Mike of sunglass movies.
Yes.
Put these sunglasses on and you can ball like Michael Jordan. No, no, we're not going down that road. This was probably by all intents and purposes a box office flop because worldwide it only made $5.5 million. When it was released on the March 3rd, 1989 weekend, it debuted at number 5, so not too bad, with a $2.5 million haul. Now, to put that into comparison, the number 1 movie that week was the debut of Lean on Me, but even that only made $5 million. So in comparison, it's not that far off, even though we are talking $1989, but it was pretty much gone right afterwards. So as there was no budget listed for the film, but you have to think of 5.5 million probably didn't make a lot of money. Yeah.
I mean, definitely not, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, I saw it in the theater when it first came out. I was like a young preteen teen, and I went and saw it. And I think I actually saw it more than once in the theater. And I had this on VHS, like I had recorded it off the TV and had it on VHS. And I was telling my sister yesterday that I was going to be on here and was, to discuss this movie. And I said, because people hate this movie and don't like this movie. And she's like, I am personally offended that people don't like this movie. Because I think it's because we saw it so young. But we had lines of dialogue memorized, and I could tell you almost beat for beat how the movie went. And that's how many times I had seen this movie. So yeah, so maybe I was $1 million of that was just me.
It very much does feel kind of like a movie of the time, especially when you consider the cast and whatnot. And, you think about movies that, you watched back in the day, and if you were to go and revisit some of those movies now, you start to question your movie sensibilities at the time. But when you say that not many people like this film, you can almost be guaranteed that not a single critic liked this, because we mentioned at the top of the show, this film sits at the distinguished tomato meter of 0%. We are at rock bottom 0%. But on the other side, you have the audience score, which is a 67%. That is a massive swing. So, before we get into it, I have to ask you, is that 67% just Corey fans, whichever Corey they were a fan of, or is that people sitting there going, there's no way it's a 0%, and they're just upvoting it just to stick it up to the critics?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's probably a combination of both. I think it's probably a lot of people that have nostalgia for this film, because I know friends that I might mention it to that maybe haven't seen it in decades, and they'll be like, oh, I loved that movie. Really? People hate that movie? So I really do think it is a nostalgia thing. So I would guess it's probably a combination of this movie isn't that bad, and we're just going to go ahead and uprate it. Or it could be people that are nostalgic for that time and for the Coreys and for what the Coreys meant at that time and to that generation, to Generation X and stuff. So I think it's probably a combination of both would be my guess, honestly.
It does feel a little bit like a John Scott situation where the fans would just vote in the least likely NHL player to go to the All-Star game and somehow it worked. Like, take a look into the story of John Scott. Like, hockey fans right now are going, I can't believe, a podcast that's about to talk about a Corey Feldman, Corey Haim movie just dropped an NHL Enforcer Goon reference, but here we are. But it very much feels like one of those, we're going to vote for this just in spite of that 0%. But let's get into the breakdown here. And Erin, I'm going to toss it over to you here. Okay. Let's start right at the top of the billing with Corey Feldman. What were your thoughts on Corey number 1 in this?
Well, I'm going back. I'm going to compare it. I'm going to compare it between when I first saw it and then when I just rewatched it last night. So when I first watched this was the first time I actually liked Corey Feldman. I was like, okay, I kind of like what he's doing. He's kind of edgy. He's kind of, his hair's black, which I love black hair. So that's probably why I mentioned that. And he's got and I loved the way he dressed with like even the, what are those, like the yellow, those yellow things from like bikes that are on his shoulders, like almost shoulder pads in a weird way. And how he had like the, dog collar and other people were wearing those too. And I remember that was a big thing, the choke collar things. And his dancing and like I think he had a hat on in one scene when he's doing a dance, and so it was like the first time I found him kind of charismatic and intriguing to watch when I was young. And now watching it back, even though I still love this movie, I will always love this movie. This movie will hold a special place in my heart. He is overacting to the nth degree. And you can also tell this was at the height of like their drug use, both the Coreys. So I think he was like using heroin or something during this time. And you can tell, he's kind of like overdoing it and he's not quite in character all the time. And I think he is acting like he's in a different movie than a lot of the other cast is, in the fact that I think he's looking at this like, this is my Oscar level performance. This is the one that's going to get me that critical acclaim and the awards love. That's really what I think he was going for. So he's not good. He's just not good in this movie. And the Michael Jackson stuff does not fit this character. So that's very jarring when you watch it, because this character would not be listening to Michael Jackson. But Corey Feldman at the time was obsessed with Michael Jackson. Like, I think it said that in the IMDb thing, like he was really into Michael Jackson and heroin. So it was like, that combination, I think, really colored this performance. So, yeah.
I will say, and yes, the Michael Jackson stuff kind of really pops out, but we also knew that he was, I wouldn't say obsessed, but clearly he was obsessed. But but there was that relationship there, and rather than kind of go down that road, I will say in the opening scene with him and Haim, where it's just like two friends hanging out clearly after a sleepover kind of thing, not knowing exactly how much drugs they were on at the time, you sit there and watch and go, oh, okay, so this is cool. You really see the friendship. I could see how this would be two friends hanging out. And now knowing that they were both into into drugs heavily, I'm like, oh my God, they're both hopped up and they're afraid to leave the room and they're just talking their way out of this until they kind of mellow out. That's kind of how it feels like that bedroom is like a discount methadone clinic for them at the time. But
wow.
We're going down that road apparently. But taking that aspect out of it, clearly when the script was written, and of course it was written around clearly Corey Feldman, since how Corey Haim was an afterthought, but I felt like the two of them really played well off each other, especially in that opening scene, because it did feel very much like the way two best friends would hang out and just talk about, pretty much anything. And I found with Feldman too that, before, by the way, spoiler alert, you've been warned. Okay. The movie came out in 1989.
Yeah,
If you haven't seen this fever dream of a flick, it's too late for you.
Exactly.
But I will say that as the movie went on, like it started off really, really confusing. And it really felt like Feldman was trying to act like he was too cool for school. But the minute that he was, embodied with Coleman's spirit or his whatever they're doing, because they never really kind of explained aside from let's do funky Tai Chi in the front yard until some kids crash into each other.
Yes.
That's when he really started to pull it together as far as an actor goes. And I felt like those moments where he's acting like Coleman is inside Bobby and trying to figure out how to be Bobby, that felt a little bit more genuine. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much of that was having Jason Robards on set, having the two of them probably talk to each other. And, you would almost picture Jason Robards to be the kind of person to help Corey Feldman get into his own mindset so he acts more like him. Very much how like an Alec Guinness really helped Mark Hamill in that first Star Wars film. They kind of fed off each other. So if that's the case, it would explain why I thought Feldman got better as the movie went on. Or maybe at this point, it was just Stockholm Syndrome for me. It could be one or the other.
Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I do think the scene right after when he's going into school for the first time and he's got Jason Robards' essence in him. I like putting it that way. The look on his face when he's looking down the hall at all the kids and it's just this insane thing and you can see the fear. He does that really well. I do agree with that. He does play that a lot better than in the beginning of the movie. Although I do agree the opening scene, which is a scene that my sister and I can recite practically, that scene is probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, because it feels like you're kind of like a fly on the wall. Like you said, it's kind of like their friendship. You're seeing their friend because they were such good friends. And so that kind of translates, and you can see that coming off the screen there in that scene. No matter where they were in life as far as their drug addiction and stuff goes, it still felt very natural. And so I think that's why it's always good to have both of them together, or at least it was during that time, because I think they play off of each other very, very well. And they're very natural together. So I agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Despite the fact that they were breaking up, the various conversations with like weird, ethereal scatting is what it kind of sounded like.
Ethereal scatting.
Which ethereal scat music is now a music genre that needs to happen in 2022.
Yes.
This needs to happen. But on the other side of the Coreys is Corey Haim. And for me, tonally, his character plays very differently from Feldman in that Haim felt like this should have been a comedy movie where Feldman was going for a more dramatic role. How was the difference for you between the two Coreys?
Well, I think this is actually my favorite Corey Haim performance as far as watching him the most, even though Lost Boys is my favorite Corey Haim movie. But I think for me, the reason I think he's so comedic and he adds that is I think they wanted comic relief, and he just kind of fit that bill because, like you said, he wasn't originally even going to be in it. So I think they kind of threw it in there and went, okay, we'll just have you be like the comic relief and you'll get some great lines. And, he originally, the character wasn't even going to have a broken leg. And then he broke his leg before filming started. So they put that in there. And so to me, it doesn't feel off-putting, or it doesn't seem like it doesn't make sense, because I think a lot of times in the 80s, and they still do it, you had that sidekick that was comic relief and was the comedian and was only there for that. And that's totally what he was there for. He was also there, I think, in some respects, to serve in some weird way, like the audience, like the viewer, because he's kind of just watching all this go on. He keeps telling it, Bobby, you can't, this is Psycho Joel's girlfriend, Lainey. You can't go after her because Joel is a psycho, and he really is a psycho. And he's also just kind of there watching everything go on. His friends don't seem to care that, his parents, like his mom ran over him with a car. They don't seem to care that he can't get around very easily, that, you know, he's kind of like an afterthought. So in a way, he's kind of just the viewer kind of being taken along on this ride and not knowing what's really going on and not knowing how he can help or where he can fit in. But he's there just kind of enjoying it, having fun. And, you know, he's just kind of there for the craziness of it all. That's kind of how I view him in this movie. But I think he's good in it. I think he's great in it, actually.
He is actually really good, and he does definitely serve as some comic relief, especially in the fact that, you know, this movie played more like an art house flick than it did an 80s comedy mind swap type movie. But I think also his character was supposed to be the reality ground point for Feldman, especially when, you know, he was, you know, had Jason Robards' essence within him. It was very much, you know, there's that touch point. There's that anchoring for that character, you know, the tether to reality for Bobby while he's trying to figure out how to be Coleman, all the while not being, he was never crazy. He was never wacky. He was just, his character just didn't give a damn. He was there. He was there for a good time, a fun time, despite not doing well in school, despite not having a good home life, despite his mom running over his leg with the car. Like, despite all of this going on, he's still, you know, he's still that best friend, and he still got his best friend. And that connection really did, you know, it felt really genuine, probably because, of course, they were good friends. And Feldman, I think, needed that. He needed that. And it still surprises me reading that Haim wasn't originally cast in this, because I couldn't see this movie without him.
Oh, yeah, definitely not. It would not have worked, in my opinion. Even though he's not really a main character, it just wouldn't work. It'd feel so empty without him there, without Dinger. It just would just be very weird and bizarre, and I wouldn't like it at all.
Of course, there is the object of affection for seemingly everybody in the film, Meredith Salinger. I really liked her in this, and I was a little worried because at first it kind of felt like they were going to give her, like, her entire character arc was going to be summed up as, and this is a quote, "looks good in a leotard." But but that's a quote from that first part of the movie that you said you memorized. So
yeah, you know. I know.
But the funny thing is, as the movie went on, she proved to be a lot more than just the eye candy of the film. You know, she wasn't just the, you know, the female MacGuffin, if you will. She really added a lot more depth to that role than I expected by the time we got to about the midway point of it.
Oh yeah, I think she's incredible, and I think she's a great actress anyway. And I like her as a person too. She's fun to follow on, like, Twitter and everything. And you know, she's so natural, and she has great chemistry with everyone in this movie. And I don't mean that just in, like, the fact that she's attractive and she's the object of affection for Joel and Bobby, and, like you said, pretty much it seems like everyone. But just putting that aside, she still is, like, just, I don't know, she has this presence on screen in this movie where she's just so beautiful inside and out. And you watch this character, and I think she is the best character in the film, honestly, as far as like, she has the biggest heart. She's the most grounded, which is kind of surprising to say, in the fact that she's dating, like, this horrible guy. But she's still, like, the one that you see will have the brightest future of all of these kids is her, for sure. If she can get away from Joel, she will have that bright future. I mean, the dancing is not professional level dancing like they like to make you think, but she's fun to watch in those scenes. And you can tell that even though I don't know how she feels about this movie, but despite any problems with the script or anything like that, you can tell she's giving her all to this. And she's a great actress. She is so natural on screen and so beautiful to watch. And I love her as Lainey. I think Lainey is a great character. I think it may seem weird since she's dating a really horrible guy in it, but I think she's actually kind of a really cool female character to see on screen, because she is attractive and she is sexy, but that's not all she is.
Mm-hmm.
She's smart. She's capable. She stands up for herself eventually. She knows what she wants. She's not like going to blindly follow Bobby, but yet at the same time, she starts following her heart. She gives her all. She's got a sweetness to her. She's a good friend, even though it may seem weird because she's going after her friend's boyfriend, but she's still a good friend. She puts up with a lot. There are a lot of people that want to control her life, like her horrible mother and her horrible mother's boyfriend. Like that guy is horrible too. And her boyfriend and all these people want to control her life. And you can see that she's trying to break free from that. And I just think she's a good role model for women, honestly. I think she's just a really great, strong character, and her performance is amazing. I love the other actresses that were considered, but I think this is her role, and it just suits her, and she's perfect in it. So,
and it is interesting that Ione Skye was one of the actresses actually up for the role of Lainey, because there are, in watching this, and then you were to watch Say Anything right afterwards, there are a lot of parallels between Lainey and unfortunately I can't remember her character's name in Say Anything, but between Ione Skye's character in that you have these female characters who are very smart, very, very strong-willed, but they have maybe overbearing parental situations and they're looking for something. Like there's so many parallels between Say Anything and this, and I think both of them, it's not like you would want to swap, but you could swap because both actresses are very good, which I also find funny because in 1989, the year this came out and the year Say Anything came out, Meredith Salinger actually won the Young Artist Award for Best Young Actress in a Motion Picture Drama for a movie called A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon.
Oh, that movie.
Which starred River Phoenix and Ione Skye. So it's very much, they'll be bonded forever.
But, that's funny. Yeah.
But there were certain things that Meredith did for Lainey as the movie was going on. And it almost felt attractive because the script didn't really go into, did Gina, who was Coleman's wife, who he was trying to kind of get back to, it was never fully explained if Gina's essence ended up in Meredith, but they kind of teased it a little bit because there were parts during one of the dance scenes where she's forgetting the steps, the fact that she couldn't remember her locker combination, just little things. But they never really explored that with her. And because Lainey is such, in the end, a strong character, and that's all thanks to Meredith Salinger, I wish they had explored that more, but you could see that dynamic. As you mentioned, it actually makes sense that she's with Joel because the way her mother is, that's just, people try to avoid dating their parents, and eventually kind of date their parents, which for the record, Lainey's mother's character name, Cherry Diamond. If that isn't a stripper name, I don't know what is. Cherry Diamond is Lainey's
that is
mother's
very much
name.
A stripper's name.
Such a stripper name, but yes, Meredith is very much Lainey is very much the beacon of hope for a lot of this movie, and she definitely works through a weak script. But let's talk about Joel, since we were talking about Lainey here. You got to be a really good actor to be a really good douche in a film, and I think William McNamara did a very good job of douching it up as Joel in this film.
Oh yeah, well, and I will say, I love William McNamara. He was someone that I loved back then. So to me, it was like, okay, the one who's the most attractive in this movie is him. And the preteen teen me was all about him. So he was great. I think he's an incredibly gifted actor. And I think, I don't know him, but I think I talked about this before on my podcast. When someone plays a psycho and someone who's really like really messed up and controlling, and he's like a stalker, and he almost kills somebody in the end. He's just totally out there. I think you are probably having a lot of fun doing that. Number one, he probably had a lot of fun playing this character because he's also played a lot of very sweet and down to earth kind of guys. And so he probably had a lot of fun doing this one as a change of pace. Plus, I think if you can play that so well, you're probably the exact opposite, has always been my guess, because that usually is true. So I think, I think Meredith Salinger is great. And I mean, the adults, which I'm sure we'll get to, are like another level. Of course, Harry Dean Stanton and Jason Robards and all of them are another level acting wise. But I think William McNamara is on the same level as Meredith Salinger, where he kind of is adding more, because this is basically a, paint by numbers kind of villain role. He is the bad guy that she needs to get away from. But there's more going on there, I think. Like, there's this level of like insecurity in Joel, and you see it especially in the climactic scene where he's there with the gun pointed at the guy who all of a sudden his name is escaping me, but pointed at the blonde hair guy. And then he almost shoots Bobby. That whole thing, where to me, that's all about insecurity, because I think he kind of feels like, who knows what his home life is like, but you kind of get the feeling that he has nothing. And so he kind of is hanging on to this fact that he's got the coolest girl in school, the prettiest girl in school, the most grounded girl in school. Her family loves me, which, I mean, oh my gosh, that mom is so horrible. But her family loves me. Maybe I don't have anything else. So he's kind of clinging to that fact. And then all of a sudden, Bobby, who's now acting like a totally different person, is taking this one thread of hope away from me. And so I think it's kind of like pulling at his already crazy behavior and his already controlling behavior. And it's like the last straw. So to me, that's a very, very insecure character. Like total insecurity there. Like he acts like he's great and he's not, kind of thing.
I was going to bring up that climactic scene with holding the gun to the bully's head there, because there was something subtle that William McNamara did, and it really sold just how scared Joel was in that moment. So, obviously when the bullies show up and all that, and he pulls out the gun, and, Joel had probably in his head kind of rehearsed that scene, in his mind kind of thing. But then it came time to like do the deed, to pull the trigger. And, at that point, Bobby and everyone else had shown up, and he's almost pressing himself against the wall of the alley as if he couldn't get further away from the bully because he's afraid to pull the trigger. And you're right. He is so scared in that moment. And for someone whose entire, persona is, I'm big, I'm bad, I'm going to bully my way through everything, and I'm going to get what I want, and no one's going to mess with me. And it finally came time for him to prove that, and he couldn't, because he was so scared and so, and that's really, really good acting. And again, they were handcuffed by a lot with this script, and those little moments where you really see just the depth that the actors brought to this, it really does play out more than just an attempt at an art house flick. It really plays out like a teen drama as opposed to a teen comedy. And put that 0% away, because, between Meredith Salinger and William McNamara, they the two of those have just disproved that 0% by themselves. But as you mentioned, let's get to the adults in the whole thing here. Let's talk about Jason Robards, Coleman, like the essence of Corey Feldman at this point in time.
Yes.
We talked about the script not really allowing for a lot. And yes, that whole entire opening, I think, half hour of the film is very disjointed. It's very, I wish they had described more of what Jason Robards was trying to go to, instead of, trying to portray it in 3 montages, because when the moment finally came, it really just felt like his entire character at that point was Tai Chi Kook who wants to live forever.
Tai Tai Chi Cuckoo wants to live forever. I like that description. That's the way I'm going to describe this character from now on.
Available now in bookstores for Christmas. Tai Chi Cuckoo Wants to Live Forever, the story of Coleman.
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that fits. Well, this is what I kind of take from this is I think a lot of movies in the 80s, you had Generation X, who were usually the kids of parents that grew up in the 60s or, were teenagers in the 60s, young in the 60s, something like that. And they were supposed to change the world and with peace, love, and all of that. And then they kind of turned into exactly like they became part of the system and didn't keep trying to fight to change the world. And Generation X to me is still the forgotten generation. We're still kind of the latchkey kids that are always perpetually latchkey kids. And I think that's kind of what Coleman is supposed to represent, except maybe an older version of that. But I think he's supposed to represent like the 60s and a little bit of the 70s, but like someone who hasn't let go of the fact that, if we just get calm and centered in ourselves and meditate and we're just there, everything will be okay in the world. And it's a great premise, but it doesn't always work, especially how hard he's trying to fight against the new generation. So to me, he kind of represents that where it's like fighting against, one side and the other side is like, you old people, you don't know what you're talking about. And you left us out here to kind of rot in this world and whatever. We don't want to hear about your peace, love, and whatever thing. We're angry and we feel alone and all of that. And so I think he's kind of at this weird turning point where he doesn't know kind of where to go. So he's latching on to the Tai Chi stuff and the meditation and the, eating tofu, which I grew up with a mom who was very much a hippie, and I grew up eating tofu, brown rice, seaweed. That to me is like a home cooked meal. I know it sounds weird, but that's the way I grew up. And I actually love tofu still to this day. So when I was watching it now, I was like, oh, that's my mom. That's my mom. That's my mom. My mom does that kind of stuff too. So I think he's trying to find a way to find peace. But while he's doing that, he's forgetting to kind of live and to kind of let go. Like he thinks he's relaxing, but he's actually doing it in such a stringent manner that he's becoming maybe everything that he's trying to fight against, if that makes sense. And I think Jason Robards is really good in this role. I mean, he's just good anyway. And I think once again, he brings more to the character than is on the script. Mm-hmm. Or in the script, excuse me. And you can see, I mean, Coleman just loves his wife so much. Like it's evident in everything he does. And I think he just so badly wants to bring his wife along on this weird journey of, we don't really know what it is, but bring her along. And she just wants to have fun. She just wants to retire and live out and go on carriage rides, which that whole scene is so funny when they're doing all that romantic stuff. It's almost like they're on a honeymoon. And it's kind of like, why is this in here? This is weird, but okay. Maybe it's just to show their love and how much they love each other. And, and then of course they've got their friend Ike that has a little bit too close of a relationship to Gina, if you ask me. That whole relationship's a little uncomfortable to me. But anyway, I think he's kind of supposed to be logical, but he is trying to pepper in flowery kind of logic to his logic, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think, again, victim of script. Jason Robards is Coleman. I agree that, the fact that he has these ideas of transcendental, infinite life, through however they're going to get it, that's all well and good. But in that opening 30 minutes, we get, I want to live forever with you and be very romantic and all that. But also, kids, get the hell off my lawn. Yeah. Like literally get off my lawn. Yeah. But so there was that, they never really, first of all, the script never really explained exactly what it was he was doing. He was just seemingly writing positive affirmations on a chalkboard, going to do Tai Chi and figuring that's going to, solve everything. But I do kind of wish they had fleshed out Gina, who's played by Piper Laurie, a bit more, in that, yes, she's a very supporting wife. She's a very loving wife. But I wish that they had, made her almost the touch point of that live in the moment, whereas Coleman's trying to live in the infinite moment. If Gina's trying to get him to come back down to earth while he's trying to live forever with her, still noble, right? But that would almost make the end a bit more satisfying, because he finally got what he wanted, was, that living to the end with his wife, rather than living forever with his wife, so long as they're still together. There was that opportunity for grounding, and I wish they had, really elaborated more on Piper Laurie's Gina, and yes, more on Jason Robards Coleman, because I think that would have helped develop. Because at this point, all we see is, grumpy get off my lawn hippie Tai Chi Jason Robards, and all of a sudden he's in Corey Feldman. You're right. Jason Robards is such a good actor. And when they do these kind of body swap type films, they clearly would pair, a legend actor with, an up and coming actor. All you got to do is take a look at that. If I remember correctly, was George Burns and Kirk Cameron together,
yes.
or was it Dudley Moore? I can't even remember, but someone and Kirk Cameron. Yeah. But you get that idea. And then of course, Lindsay Lohan was in the Freaky Friday remake. I think it was with Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, you had that dynamic, and you have good actors on either side, but they never really developed Coleman and Gina enough for us to really want Bobby to be able to bring them back together in, outside of the dreamscape. Let's talk about Harry Dean Stanton here. There is a quote from Roger Ebert, and it was, "Nothing bad can be said about a movie with Harry Dean Stanton in it. With Dream a Little Dream, I may have to rethink that."
I remember reading that. Yeah, I mean, he's Harry Dean Stanton. I still don't think you can say anything bad about him, at least.
No, very much not. No.
No, he's so good. He's just a natural. And what I like about, even though I do think Ike has this weird closeness to Gina, like the scene in the kitchen when he's in there and he's like, he kisses her and then he's really close to her physically. And he's like, we should run away together. And I think it's supposed to be funny, but at the same time, it kind of comes off as someone who's been like lusting after his friend's wife for like decades or something. It just was kind of a weird thing, kind of uncomfortable.
But the funny thing is, as you say that, it almost draws a parallel, because when you think about it, if Ike is lusting after Gina in his own way, it parallels Bobby wanting to be with Lainey, even though she's with Joel. So in hindsight, it's funny because it just kind of hit as you were saying that, like, there's a parallel there that, after, if you go back and watch it a few more times and really delve into the movie more than you probably should, you do see that parallel there. And again, I wish they had, given Harry Dean Stanton's character a bit more of a way to help Bobby see that. And then of course, like, we know that Coleman is within Bobby, so that's going to be kind of awkward in the end. But there are so many tangents in this film that needed to be explained, I think, a bit more.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a good catch with the parallel there. Yeah. Except for he's not, psycho, but yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I, thinking about it, I think this character, Ike, is very similar in a lot of ways, except for he's a little bit more grounded to the character he plays in Pretty in Pink as Andy's father. And that one, I think that's very similar kind of character, where he's kind of more grounded though than that character, but he, I think, is kind of a combination of Gina and Coleman in some kind of weird way. Like, he's their friend maybe that never got married, or he's always just kind of been there as the reliable one if they ever needed, like a lift somewhere, or if a car broke down, or if Coleman was on one of his weird things, Ike would always be there. And that's very evident in the fact that Gina wants Ike to talk to Coleman and try to get Coleman to be reasonable. And then you later see it when Coleman's essence is in Bobby, that of course he goes to Ike. And, after a while, Ike does believe him. But so I think that's what Ike is. Ike is also kind of, in a way, except for a more grounded version, kind of like the Dinger too, in a way. He's kind of like the Dinger character, where he's like trying to ground things in reality, and he's trying to tell Coleman, you gotta come back or you're going to lose Gina. I don't think that was ever really a threat, but Gina really is worried about you. She wants you to get back to reality. She wants you to just live in the moment, not in the future. And I think Ike kind of parallels a lot of the characters, really, when you think about it. So
I do. It makes me kind of wish that we still had Corey Haim with us today, because as we really delve into this, it would be interesting if they did a real sequel to Dream a Little Dream, where you had Feldman and Meredith Salinger. Maybe they're the ones who are trying to then kind of pick up where Coleman left off, look into the study and all that. And of course, then Haim becomes the Ike character. There's, sadly we'll never get that movie, but it's there. It could be there. I mean, if Halloween can do sequels that ignore other sequels in the lineage, then Dream a Little Dream can do the same.
That's true.
We started to talk a little bit about best stripper name in movie, Cherry Diamond. Lainey's mom is played by Susan Blakely. Aside from the fact that who the hell willfully drugs their daughter, Susan Blakely really, brought across that hoity-toity, I'm too good for you and I know what's best for you and all that, but basically bad mom kind of thing. But she did it. Again, it takes a really good actor, much like William McNamara, to play someone that you're supposed to hate, and you do hate them. It's like wrestling heels. The best wrestlers in wrestling are the ones that can get the crowd to turn on them completely. Susan Blakely just straight up wrestling heeled Dream a Little Dream, and it works so well because Meredith Salinger is this beacon of hope.
Yeah, and it's also a character that you saw a lot in the 80s. You saw a lot in horror movies. I'm a big horror fan. And so you'd see characters like this, especially in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, where you had other moms that were drugging their kids to make their kids go to sleep. And I think, once again, she also represents, I think, what a lot of, she represents the yuppies and maybe even the yippies, the yuppies/hippies. She very much represents status. And to her, Bobby doesn't fit that status, whereas Joel does. And I think it's all about appearance there, because Joel kind of has that preppy vibe to him in some way, even though he hangs out with a lot of people that aren't preppy, but he's got that preppy look, and maybe he comes from money, would be my guess, or something. So maybe she didn't come from money and she's kind of striving for that. But it's weird because she wants the best for her daughter. And she's even she doesn't even care that her daughter's boyfriend tried to assault her daughter on the dance floor, and doesn't even care about that at all, because for appearance sake, it would be better if her daughter was with somebody like Joel than somebody like Bobby. So she has her drugged. But then at the same time, when Bobby breaks that window, goes in there and he's bleeding and gets blood all over Lainey's face when she's sleeping after she's been drugged, she goes in there and she is just really worried about her daughter. I think that's the only time you ever see a little bit of she's an actual parent who actually cares about her daughter, is that moment. So I think, once again, that does take, like you said, a gifted actor to pull that off, because she could come off as just a thinly written villain, because she is a horrible person. But there is that moment where she's like, oh my gosh, what did you do to my daughter? It even seems like she's afraid her daughter is dead because of seeing the blood, I think is what does that. And she has that, line of animal and all that, even though she drugged her daughter. So it's this weird parallel where she's like not always nice to her daughter, does horrible things to her daughter, but yet deeply loves her daughter and maybe just wants better things for her daughter and thinks this is how you do that. This is how you're a good parent, is by trying to control your child. So I think that's a lot of where that was coming from. But yeah.
Yeah, Susan really brought to Cherry, almost the characteristics of someone who, when they were growing up, made a lot of mistakes in their life. It really felt like, Cherry was trying so hard to do for her daughter the things that she never did for herself, like make the right choices, which were the choices that she didn't make growing up, which is why she's saying, no, Joel's a nice guy. He looks nice. He drives the right car. He dresses the right way. Like, he's who you should be with, not with, discount Michael Jackson over there. No, but there's a lot of projection, I think, that Susan Blakely gave to Cherry Diamond. And again, really kudos to the cast who pulled out a lot more than was in the script. On the other side, though, there were Bobby's parents, Alex Rocco and Victoria Jackson. And you laugh, but this is one of those times when I sit there and say the script was a lot more in-depth and complex than people might give it credit for, because there's this dynamic between Bobby and his dad where both of them, rather than talk to each other, they were communicating through the mom, Victoria Jackson, who, for the record, is unrecognizable in this damn movie. I'm like, that's Victoria Jackson? But until you hear her speak, and then it's like, okay, no, that's Victoria Jackson. But the fact that they were communicating through her to the other, even when they're all in the same room, not only does that create, that in itself tells the dynamic between Bobby and his dad, rather than, just in his room with Corey Haim saying, yeah, well, at least your parents talk to you kind of thing. This actually showed the depth of what that was at. So when eventually, once Bobby kind of loses it to his parents, not at his parents, but to his parents, on how he just needs their help, it's tough being a kid, all that kind of stuff. So the next time that they see him, and his dad actually talks to Bobby, that scene holds way more weight because of the dynamic, because the fact that they stuck to that, look to Victoria Jackson. Can you tell Bobby that, he needs to do this? Like, it was way more in depth, complex, and brilliant than I think, more of that should have been done with the movie, like more of that complexity in the script writing and the plot, because to me, it was really, really good.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I the reason I laughed was just because there's this, it's once again, it's parents that are kind of out of touch with their kids, of course. But I think with these parents, they've kind of gotten to this point where, not that they're lost, but they don't know what to do for their son, but they love their son a lot. Like, even though they were neglectful in a way where, with that whole, like you're talking about, the whole big speech that Bobby has with him, and when he's got the essence of Coleman in him, so it's a little bit different, but still, that was an important moment for them, because I think that was the first time where the parents were like, oh, okay, maybe we can connect with our son, even though they still went about doing it where they're like, where they're communicating through the mom and they're not directly always talking to each other. It still felt like they had some kind of connection with their son. They care about their son a lot. I think they kind of seem to me kind of broken down themselves. Like, I think they're in a really good marriage. I think they really love each other. But I think they might be broken down by life is kind of what I got the impression of. And they kind of just have this routine that they're going through. And because they're kind of broken down by life, their son has his own little life that he leads. He's probably not home a lot, is my guess. So it's kind of like this fractured family. And once again, I think that was very true of the 80s, of what you'd see a lot is that fractured family, and where you didn't have the kids communicating with their parents and the parents not communicating with the kids. And this is like kind of an exaggerated example in some respects of that. But at the same time, it shows people just kind of going through the motions and what happens when you keep going through the motions and you're not really living your life. And I think that's what they represent. But they really love their son, and you can see that in the end. And I think that was very important to have in the movie, because I think if you had every parent act like they don't care about their child, and not a single parent seems to really genuinely care, I think that kind of ruins it in some respect, because then basically what you're saying is every adult is worthless. And I don't think that was the point of the movie. So, I mean, I like those parents. I think that might have been hard as a kid to grow up with those parents, but I like them in the end because I think they genuinely do love their son and care a great deal for their son.
Mm-hmm. And I have to give it up to Alex Rocco, because in that moment when he finally talks to Bobby, after Bobby finally talks to him and explains to him all the things that he's having problems with, there's such a vulnerability in that moment that Alex Rocco has put into the dad. And it's, it sucks you in, right? Because it's so, he's timid and afraid, but he's caring and compassionate and vulnerable, and like, and even at the end, right? That breakthrough moment is through, and then Bobby leaves to go do what because he's got stuff to do. He had stuff to do for most, the second half of the movie. But, even at the end, like once Bobby's gone, just that little line of like looking at Victoria Jackson saying, okay, make sure to tell Bobby that, that we're there to help him. It's like, it's not all the way solved, which is, why he kind of goes back to her to kind of go back to, we have work to do kind of thing, but this will be better kind of thing. But just in that moment when he finally breaks and talks directly to him, it's a much more powerful moment. I don't know if they could have picked a better person to be Bobby's dad than Alex Rocco. Like really, that was perfect casting in that.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. He's one of those under the radar actors, I think, forever. He's one of those like character actors that people don't talk about a lot. But he's really, really good and plays a lot of those lines really well. Like, what I think that's why I like this movie so much is that even though the script, on the surface is very weak, I think everybody is giving so much to this. It's not, people aren't like phoning it in. It's like people actually cared about their roles and cared about what they were doing. And you see that in Alex Rocco. You see it in Victoria Jackson. You see it in every single person pretty much in this movie. They're giving everything to this. So they're like, okay, we may be dealing with a weaker script, but we're going to elevate it some, and we're going to add little subtle details here and there. And, even the, when she says, tell him he looks nice, you look nice, honey, that kind of stuff, those little things of like, I'm sure that was in the script, but the way it's delivered and the look in their eyes. I mean, I always say the way I can tell there is a good performance is if I look in the eyes and I see the character in the eyes. And for almost all these actors, you can see that character there. They fully committed to these roles. And I think that's why the movie, to me, holds a special place in my heart, because of how much everybody was giving to their roles. They believed in what they were doing, and they found something a little bit deeper in here. And Alex Rocco's performance is just another example of that to me.
We've spent the better part of an hour talking about how good the actors are in this film. We now need to take it behind the scenes here, and let's talk about Mark Rocco, the director on this one. I don't know if the movie was poorly directed, but definitely some interesting choices were made in the editing process, because I lost track of how many montages they put into this film.
It's true.
I lost count at about 8, I think.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Like, People may rip on Rocky 4 for being like the Rocky with the most montages, but this movie literally looked at Rocky 4, said, "Hold my dream beer," and decided to, gonna need a montage. Montage.
That's so true.
And unfortunately, it was one of those things where I don't know if they tried to overcompensate for the script and the lack of fleshing out the plot by trying to go with style over substance. But after a while, it's like, can we turn off the CD player or the tape deck at the time and just let the story evolve with this? But as far as a directing standpoint, how was this for you?
Okay, well, I'm going to defend a little bit of the montages and the directing a little bit here, because it's one of the things I actually kind of really love is all of those different things. I'm a music geek, and I think the needle drops and all that kind of stuff work really well in this. And I don't mind the montage. I see what you're saying, because there are a lot of them here. And it does seem like maybe the director and the editor, they were trying to use it as to make it seem like it had more depth than it did as far as the script went. But I think the director, we've talked a lot about how great the performances are. And I do think, an editor can make or break a performance sometimes. So the editor might have even made the performances even better than they were. With the director, I don't know. I got the feeling, because of the fact that maybe the script might not have been that great or isn't that great, that even though that happened, I think the actors, I get the feeling, really liked working with the director. I have a feeling the director trusted the actors enough to kind of let them go. I think the best directing is when you don't really see the directing that much. And honestly, I can see why people might say you do see the directing, but I think there are some times where he kind of lets the actors do what they're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And he lets that take the place, and he doesn't over direct it. He doesn't over stylize it. Yes, the montages, but putting that aside, like those moments that you have that he lets the actors breathe in, like when we talked about Joel and that whole moment in the end with the gun and, the way that's played, there's he could have easily turned all of that into a montage. And yes, there's a montage before that, but he lets that scene breathe. And I think that was very important because of the performance there. And because you really got to see a lot more from Joel in that. I mean, even in the moment right before that, when he arrives and they're like, "You were stupid to arrive alone." He pulls out that gun and they're all scared. And then he's like, "Hey, it's a party. Who brought the dip?" And the way he just delivers that line, I think the director knew well enough that in the next scene, he had to make it kind of silent, even though you had the music in the background, but it had to be this more intimate scene where he trusted his actors. So even though there is some more stylized stuff that might not work, and you can tell he's really going for that indie look, that really kind of different kind of thing, he still trusted his actors. And so I give him props for that, because I think that kind of contributed to why there were such good performances. But that's me defending it a little bit. But
the actors definitely do save this film, and I think a lot of the directing was made to maybe overcompensate from, let's be honest about this film. It doesn't get off to a good start. It cuts off to a very convoluted, complicated, like very confusing start, and then it really picks up the moment that Bobby and Lainey bump into each other while Tai Chi is happening in the front yard, and then it kind of picks up from that mind essence dream state, like body swap kind of thing, and from that point to just before the end. It's actually a really good movie, and even the montages work at that part. We probably could have done with the 3 or 4 montages that happened in the first half hour, but but if they had just cleaned up the beginning, both in plot, development, and script, then you got a really, really good film. And then there was the part at the end where it's like, don't let Lady go to sleep. Don't let oh no, she's asleep. No, dream state. It didn't matter anyways. Like, come on.
Yeah.
There has to be a reason why or how, not just, movie's over. Okay, you're back. It's normal. It was all just a dream, the ending needed to be cleaned up. Although I did like that moment between Robards and Feldman at the end, where it's like, it's okay. You can walk on the lawn. No, I'm going to respect this. Like, that moment was really, really nice. I just wish the resolution to get Robards back was a bit more understandable, but I think that's more on the script side of things. The other thing in that first half hour, it started out as clever, and then it became really freaking annoying, was that they would jump back and forth between Coleman and Gina, and then all the teenagers, in that one person would say a line of dialogue and it kind of led into like the next scene, and then it had led back, and it just kept going on and on and on like that. And I'm just like, oh, you're so clever. Here's a hero. Best kid. Now stop doing that. Like, literally, it works in small doses, but over that stretch of time, it was, I don't know who was showing off more, the director or the writer at that point.
I think it's the director, probably. I mean, honestly, I think because the director could have been like, okay, we're going to cut some of this. It's not making sense. And the editor could have, said something about that too. And yeah, I mean, the ending, yes, that's a big glaring neon sign, is like, what was the point then? I mean, because you raise the stakes and you're raising the stakes and you keep raising the stakes, and then the stakes didn't matter at all. So that is a very, very, very bad thing in this movie. That is, I think, the reason so many people are frustrated with this movie, is the fact that there is, there's a payoff, but there was nothing really that Bobby or Coleman really had to do to earn that payoff. It's kind of like, okay. And honestly, Bobby, when you look at Bobby in all the dream sequences, he's not different. Bobby never changes. Never. Which is what's so weird to me. It's kind of like all of a sudden then when he comes back, he's like, oh no, I'm totally like Coleman now. And I've taken on a lot of the essence of Coleman and I'm a totally reformed kid. But there was no kind of evolution of that. And I'm wondering if it was the script or if there was ever stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. Or I also wonder if there was maybe a darker ending or more to this that they cut or were told by the studio they couldn't do, or something like that. I kind of wonder that, because it felt like the stakes were so big, and then all of a sudden they went, okay, we don't know what to do. How do we solve this? We'll just say, oh, never mind. We'll just like Dallas it, literally, like it was all a dream and this is okay now. And, Bobby will be just like Coleman. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, is kind of the impression I got. And the more we're talking about this movie, it's really funny, because one of my absolute all-time favorite movies that I've seen more than 60 times is Donnie Darko. And a lot of the complaints that people have about Dream a Little Dream could even be said about Donnie Darko, even though Donnie Darko is miles above this one, with the fact that, I don't know if you've seen Donnie Darko, but Donnie Darko doesn't necessarily make sense to everybody. A lot of it is left up to your interpretation of what the movie is about. And I think in some ways that can be said on this one, except for they didn't know how to stick the landing in this one. I think they were afraid to go too dark, or I don't know what they could have done to make it better. Like maybe have Bobby have to fight for something, or Bobby is actually trying to fight for his life too in the dream, or have Gina be more of an active participant in the dream than she is in the dream state. Something like that. So I think it was that they had a good idea and then they didn't know how to stick the landing. Mm-hmm. Because, there's great scenes. The gun scene, I think, is amazing, but they didn't know how to stick everything else. It's like all of this, oh my gosh, tension, and then boom, it's okay. Everything's fine.
I do wonder, because there were these moments in the dream state, which, for the record, way too many audio sound effects in the dream state, because that was touch much. It was like the audio montage, but but there was this underlying thing in that, Bobby wasn't happy with who he was because he didn't get along with his dad. He didn't. And there was this part where in the dream state where he was like, I don't want to do this, but I like what's happening now. I like where my life is going. And, if it was one of those things where, Coleman had finally said, you know what? I figured it out. This is how I get to be with Gina. And it means, making someone else's life better by giving into the fact that there is immortality. It's there could have been a better way to resolve it, I think. But you're right. It was just like, I said he shouldn't go to sleep. Oh well, didn't matter anyways. It was very much like, the end of The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, where if you actually read the book, right, like it's like what 1,200 page book, and like the first half of The Stand is like such a page turner, like I couldn't put it down, and then third part gets a little bit mystical, then the fourth part's like, how the hell do I end this? Okay, hand of God touches down a bomb in Vegas. All right, cool. Story over. Game over. Like, where did that come from? It was just very, very, like it's almost like they needed to end it and they just kind of pulled the plug. It was very abrupt. Again, kudos to the actors for really making the most out of what they were handed. And I think more than what they were handed. But you mentioned the montages because of the soundtrack. This soundtrack is such an 80s vibe all the way through. I mean, you've got the singers of Starship, Loverboy. You have what became a #1 hit song in Michael Damian's cover of Rock On with Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, and Meredith Salinger in the music video. More dancing ensued from Corey Feldman. Like R.E.M., Van Morrison. And somehow Mel Torme, the Velvet Fog himself, is on the soundtrack to Dream a Little Dream. I will say, because that's the duet. It was the guy from Starship and Mel Torme doing that duet of Dream a Little Dream, while Jason Robards and Corey Feldman are dancing at the end. That scene, I mean, the song, great, loved it. Mel Torme could do no wrong. But that scene felt like the end of a comedy movie when we just watched a teen dramedy, and it felt out of place.
Yes, but I still love it. But no, you're right. It does seem out of place, but I love the music in this movie. I love the music in this movie. I'm a huge 80s music geek, and I went to Spotify right after I watched this last night and added like the Dream a Little Dream soundtrack to my list because I think everything, all of them, the old classics and then the 80s songs and the Rock On, that song. I remember when I was young and hearing that song and thinking it was so like intense and powerful and meaningful. And I know it's silly and cheesy now, but it was such a cool song. Oh my gosh, I loved that song. So that's another thing I love about this movie so much is the music. It's so great. It's just amazing. I don't know.
Rock On is definitely one of those songs that, yes, it was absolutely everywhere. Like you couldn't get away from it. And if you weren't going Rock On, like, whenever you went anywhere, like you kind of missed the point on 80s music. And it is one of those songs where kind of much like this movie, at the time you watch it or the time you listen to it, like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And then you go back to it and go, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But still, Rock On. Like it hits some good nostalgia vibes now when you go back. And of course, like REM's, It's the End of the World as We Know It's on there. Van Morrison. Like it is a really, really good 80s soundtrack. Minus the, Degrassi Junior High vibes you get from like the random stock music that they've got for some of the scenes, but the soundtrack you really can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Except for the costuming.
Oh my gosh. The costuming.
We need to talk about what the hell is on Corey Feldman throughout most of this movie.
Yeah.
Because there is a whole lot of blang there that probably shouldn't be there. And it's been a bit where did people really dress that bad in the 80s?
Yes. Yes, but still, I think his was a little exaggerated. I mean, he's literally wearing like the yellow, what are those from bikes, the yellow like lights or whatever on his shoulders. I mean, he's wearing that. And there was like a time, I remember when I was younger, I thought his shirt said Pier 1 Imports. I don't think that's what it says, but that's what I thought. And I'm like, that's weird. Why is he wearing a shirt that says Pier 1 Imports? Oh, well. But yeah, the way he dresses is just bizarre. It's like they took every single kind of cliche, weird 80s dress and put all of it together and just put it on him. And he's so weird.
They very much were, I think, character developing through wardrobe at this point. Yes. Of course, Corey Haim looking like a cross between a punk band and his Lost Boys character. Corey Feldman was very, very much embodying that Michael Jackson love of his, because there were outfits there that you're like, did he just come off the Michael Jackson movie set? Complete with the fedora. Of course, like all the workout spandex leotards, of course, of Meredith Salinger, which I'm like, wasn't that an early 80s thing? But I guess it was still a late 80s thing. I'm not quite sure, but there was very much a lot of character development through wardrobe in this. Maybe a touch much, but definitely stood out. I don't know. I know personally, I would never, ever leave the house in anything anyone wore in this film. But I do appreciate the entire, all right, I got my shirt, I'm going to start to cut some holes in the jeans and, make it look punk.
Yeah. Well, that's why it was so weird to me that Bobby was so into Michael Jackson, because frankly, I don't think his character would have been. That was so weird to me. It was like kind of like he was like trying to be punk, but he's also into Michael Jackson, and it just didn't fit in my head. I couldn't make it compute, except for the fact that Corey Feldman loved Michael Jackson. So that was the only way it kind of made sense. But yeah, they have, I mean, to me, Dinger with his hair and his hair color like that, I mean, that I loved. I loved the way Dinger dressed, honestly. I think that was the best. And maybe that's just because, when I was younger, I hung out with punks and goths and stuff. And so that might be where that's coming from. Although they really didn't decide what any of these people were. And it was really interesting to me that you had people like Joel, who's dressed very preppy and hanging out with people that usually you wouldn't see in movies like this, them hanging out together. Like Dinger and Joel probably would not usually hang out together. And Lainey is very much kind of preppy dressing too. And then you've got the punk bullies who you would think would actually be hanging out with Dinger. It's this, and Bobby and stuff. It's this weird mixture. They kind of just threw everybody together and went, we're just going to make all these people friends, even if it seems like they might normally not be friends in these 80s movies that we normally put them in, or in high school in general. They might not have actually hung out with each other either. So yeah, it was really interesting.
It is interesting that you point out that Joel dresses very much like a prep, even though he's hanging out with Dinger and Bobby. In that, Joel comes across to me like the kind of character who would dress the part of the person he wants to be with. So clearly he's dressing to A, hide his insecurities, B, make himself feel more important than he is, and C, be the kind of person that he thinks Lainey wants to be with, or that Cherry thinks should be with Lainey, depending on, because if he's met the mom already, then he knows like, okay, I got to be this person if I want to be with her, and that's what I got to do. Again, character development through wardrobe. And with Joel And I think with Meredith too, I think it works. With the Coreys, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point about Joel dressing for who he's trying to date or who he's trying to be, because I think that's who Joel is. Joel is just this lost character who probably, if you were to follow him down the line, he probably maybe died at a very young age or ended up like getting married and divorced or in jail or something like that, because he's a very lost guy. But yeah, that's a good point that he was more dressing the part and dressing how he thought he should dress to get into Lainey's life or to fit in a certain way. And he's also comes off as like he's the leader of the crew. It's almost like he's taken in Bobby and Dinger. That's the feeling I get, because there's that whole line when Bobby, doesn't know where he's supposed to sit in class after he's got the essence of Coleman in him, and he's moving back there, and Dinger is like, why is he being such a dweeb? And Joel's like, I don't know, but he's my dweeb. And so Joel is very protective of these guys, even though he gets really upset with them. It's this very interesting thing where he's like the king on the hill, but at the same time, he could fit in anywhere. So it's an interesting dynamic because of the way that Dinger and Bobby are dressed, it doesn't seem like they would be taken in by him. So I wonder if maybe way back when they were little kids, they've always been friends. And so it's like this weird kind of protection dynamic that Joel has with them. I don't know.
It very much feels like Joel is a lonely kid who, like you said, doesn't have much, plays a role in order to be able to kind of get along and cope, surrounds himself with people like Dinger and Bobby because they just don't care who he is. So, and they're probably the kind of people who he can feel superior to because, Joel would be smart. Joel would be street smart. Bobby and Dinger, maybe not so much. And that's who he's going to surround himself so he can feel better. I want more Joel. There's so much more Joel in this that needs to happen. So before we get to the MVP of the film, I have to ask you, because now we have to go back to the Rotten Tomato score of 0%. 100% montage, 0% critics rating.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily is this a 0% film, because I think we've clearly proven that it's not. But I think the question for you is, why did the critics give this a 0%?
Well, I think number one, the ending is probably a big part of it. Number two, I don't think for the most part the Coreys had much respect among critics. I think Corey Haim a little bit more than Corey Feldman, but I don't think they were really respected. They were thought of as just teen heartthrob kind of things. I think it's also probably the montages too, to be honest, and the music. And I think this was just thrown away as another silly teen drama or teen comedy or a body swap kind of movie because those were so big back then. So I think that's a big reason. Definitely probably the script, I think it's just people couldn't make sense of the ending. So they were like, whatever, I don't know what this movie is doing. I don't know why people are watching this movie. And, I think they might have even had their judgment a little bit clouded just because it's a teen movie, to be honest. I think sometimes critics are a little bit harsher on those than on other movies, unless they were John Hughes teen movies. I think they just kind of were back then.
I think you also had some shifting sensibilities as far as pop culture went, because we're talking 1989, and even though it's earlier 1989, but you're really 2 years away from grunge really exploding, and you were starting to see people kind of step away from like the feel good 80s vibes, like you mentioned, that John Hughes sensibilities, and you had the rise of almost slacker characters. Like, we talked about Say Anything earlier. Lloyd Dobler is, while he's a really good guy and John Cusack is awesome in it, Lloyd Dobler, as far as, character with future all planned out, he is not. Same thing with Bobby and Dinger here. These are guys whose future has, they haven't planned. they have no plan whatsoever. And you were seeing these characters start to come to fruition. But I think you're right too about the ending and the beginning. Even though I think the middle is actually quite good. Like, this movie is kind of like a really, really good smoked meat sandwich with like double decker meat, but instead of bread, they used like manure turds to make it the sandwich. They have poo bread, but a really good middle of the sandwich, and they needed to actually use real bread. That is my disgusting food analogy for the day. Thank you very kindly. we just went there. At least the stuff in the middle is not the poop that we're talking about. It's not that sandwich of film. It's much better than 0%. Yes. Okay, Erin, it's time. So, who is your MVP of Dream a Little Dream?
You know, I think it's just from this conversation, I'm picking Joel. Because I think Joel is the character that once we started talking about it, that's the character I wanted to talk about the most. That was the character I did. Even though he's horrible, that's the MVP. So William McNamara is the MVP for me for this movie.
I think for me, I have to go the other way. And it's Meredith Salinger.
Yeah, that was my other choice. But.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like, I was very much like tossing up the two, whether it be William McNamara or Meredith Salinger. You know, it's funny that their story is much more engaging than the Corey's story, even though Feldman did really, I think he did a lot better as the movie went on. But yeah, there was something about Meredith Salinger. Like you said, she's the beacon of hope. She's an all-around positive character. She is just the brightest part of this film. Fully agree with everything that you said about her. But yes, William McNamara is also right up there. And I would love if they ever did a Dream a Little Dream 2, Meredith Salinger, William McNamara, please come back to this. Please come back to this.
Let's make this happen. Explore those characters more, you know.
Exactly.
I'd like to know where they are now, where they've ended up.
Let's put some bread on the sandwich here.
Yes, some good bread, some good sourdough bread or something like that.
And let's keep it to a 2 montage limit here.
A 2 montage limit. Yes.
Erin, thank you so much. Not only for bringing this movie to my attention here and letting us talk about this, but for joining in on this really fun conversation. Now, for those who've never heard the It's a Fandom Thing podcast, can you tell us a little bit about that and where we can hear it?
Yes, definitely. So It's a Fandom Thing is a podcast. We cover all things fandom and pop culture, primarily from the female perspective. Sometimes we have other people on that are not female, but we talk about everything from television shows to movies to music. We sometimes have different themes, like we've covered horror a lot. We're about to do a Christmas movies episode. So we just cover a lot of things in pop culture. And the reason it's called It's a Fandom Thing is we talk a lot about why we're fans of certain things. We also take a very critical approach to media as well. So sometimes we'll be looking at the things that aren't necessarily working or the things that are not okay, and try to take a critical approach to the things that we love as fans. So we find even the flaws in the things that we adore. But we also just have a lot of fun. I have a lot of different panelists that join me, and we can be found pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. So we can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, all those places. And then we can be found, of course, on social media. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/itsafandom_thing_pod, on Twitter at fandomthingpod. No, it's in that one. On Instagram at It's a Fandom Thing Pod. We have a TikTok at It's a Fandom Thing Pod. I'm still trying to figure TikTok out, but we have TikTok. And we also have a YouTube channel, and we do live streams as well. And that's also It's a Fandom Thing Pod. So we do, like, we're covering the new season of Dexter, and so we do live streams after that. Sometimes we do live streams of our podcast episodes, but those are a lot of fun too. So yeah.
Well,
so
when you figure out TikTok, please explain it to me, because I haven't even bothered. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, you know, I look at TikTok, maybe one of those things I never actually touch. But Erin, thank you so much for this. This was so much fun. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of It's Not That Bad. Now, here's the deal, and you know the deal. If you think there is a film that is unfairly maligned, or is just bad enough that there's no way we can find anything good to say about it, hit me up on Twitter at NotThatBadCast. Put it out there. We'll probably invite you onto the show. We'll dissect it, and we're going to have a good time talking about it, because there are no bad movies. Okay, there are, but we will find the good things in them. This is It's Not That Bad. Until next time, take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, Skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.